Open the bag. Empty it. Now. The man saying it owned the floor I was standing on, the chandeliers above me, and the $400 champagne that nobody in the room was actually drinking. He was also my husband's father. His name was Royce Hartwell, and for 2 years, he had been waiting for an excuse to do this in public. The lobby smelled of lilies and floor polish. Behind me, a string trio had stopped mid-phrase. 300 guests in silk and black tie had gone quiet, the particular quiet a room falls into when it senses blood in the water. A security man in a gray suit stood close enough that I could hear him breathing. I held my small clutch out to Royce. I did not shake. I had learned a long time ago that shaking is the thing they feed on. This is a misunderstanding, I said. The only misunderstanding, Royce said, loud enough to carry to the bar, was letting you through the door. My name is Naomi. I was 31 that night, and I was being searched like a pickpocket at my father-in-law's grand reopening gala in front of half of Charleston, over a ring I had never touched. What Royce did not know, what nobody under those chandeliers knew, was that the man whose money was holding his entire empire upright was at that exact moment 12 minutes away, sitting in the back of a plain sedan on the crosstown, reading the same text message I had just slipped back into my clutch. By midnight, the Hartwell name would be finished, and the quiet woman in the gray dress would be the reason. Before I tell you how a man worth $900 million ended up sitting on his own marble floor, do me one small favor. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what you would have done if you'd been standing in that lobby. I read every single one. My name is Naomi Hartwell now, but I grew up Naomi Vale, and that second name is the whole reason this story exists. For 2 years, I let the Hartwells believe I came from nothing. That was a choice, not an accident. When I met Ethan, I was a pediatric nurse working night shifts at a children's hospital, renting half a duplex with a window that leaked and a cat that openly disliked me. Ethan had no idea who my father was. I wanted it that way. I wanted to be picked for myself, not for the things standing behind me. So I drove a 9-year-old Honda. I bought my clothes off the regular rack, and I never once corrected an assumption anybody made about me. My father is Julian Vale. If you pay attention to money at all, the name might mean something to you. He runs a capital firm out of New York that quietly owns slices of things people assume are too big to be owned by anyone. He came up with empty pockets and built something enormous, and the one lesson of his that stuck with me was this. Watch how a person treats the people who can do nothing for them. That tells you who they actually are, really. Watch the waiter, watch the valet, watch the kid refilling the water glasses. He used to say the loudest man in any room is rarely the richest is rarely the kindest, and you should be careful around anyone convinced he is both. Royce Hartwell was convinced he was both. He had built a hospitality empire up and down the Carolina coast. Hotels, resorts, a members-only club with a wait list longer than most marriages. The Ashbury was his crown, a 140-year-old hotel on the Charleston waterfront that he had spent 2 years and a small fortune restoring. The gala that night was its grand reopening. He had invited everyone who mattered to him, which is another way of saying everyone he wanted there to watch him win. Ethan was the soft one in that family, and they never forgave him for it. He grew up flinching at his father's voice. I think part of what he loved about me was that I never flinched at anything. Just stay close to me tonight, he'd said in the car. Dad's in one of his moods. I squeezed his hand and told him I always did. What I didn't tell him, not even him, was that my father had landed in Charleston that afternoon, and that the Ashbury, this beautiful restored crown, was reopening on borrowed time and borrowed money. Most of it borrowed from us. Royce never raised a hand to me. He was far too careful for that. His cruelty arrived dressed up as concern, which is the kind that does the most damage, because you can never quite put your finger on it. The first Thanksgiving I spent in that house, he seated me at the children's table. I was 29. He did it with a warm smile and a hand on my shoulder, and the words, "We thought you'd be more comfortable somewhere casual." 8 adults watched it happen, and not one of them said a word. I cut my turkey next to a 6-year-old who shared his crayons with me, and honestly, he was the best company at the table. When Ethan and I got married, just the two of us and a courthouse and lunch after, Royce sent a card. Inside was a note in his hard, slanted handwriting and a check. The note read, "For when this runs its course." The check was for $10,000. I never cashed it. I kept it in a drawer the way you keep a splinter in a jar, as proof to yourself that you didn't imagine the wound. His wife, Victoria, was worse in a quieter register. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. She had a way of letting her eyes move over my shoes and my bag and my hands, then sliding away as if she'd seen enough to know everything. At a Christmas party, she introduced me to a senator's wife as Ethan's little nurse. Not his wife. His nurse. As if I were staff he'd grown a touch too fond of. I want to be straight with you because the easy version of this makes me a saint, and I was no saint. I let it happen. For 2 years, I sat at the small table and swallowed the comments and told Ethan not to make a scene because I didn't want to be the reason his family came apart. I told myself I was being graceful. Mostly, I was just being tired. There is a kind of tired that looks exactly like patience from the outside. The gala had started fine. Within 10 minutes, I knew the valets by name, Marcus, who was working a double, and a kid named Tomas, who couldn't have been 20. I asked Tomas about the cast on his wrist. I knew the coat check woman was named Renee, and that her mother had just had a hip replaced. None of them knew who I was. They only knew I saw them. Most nights, in rooms like that, nobody sees them at all. Royce found me near the staircase about an hour in, glass in hand, an audience already gathering the way he liked. His executives had been murmuring all night, and I'd caught fragments walking past. The recap closes Monday. If Vale walks, we don't make payroll past spring. The whole thing's riding on the Vale money. They said the name Vale the way you say the name of a surgeon you're waiting on. Not one of them had ever met him. I sipped my water and stayed quiet. "Naomi," Royce said loud. "A word." The trio kept playing, softer now. Conversations dropped to murmurs. I set my glass down and folded my hands. "Of course, Royce. 2 years, he said, swirling his drink. 2 years you've sat at my table, and in all that time, nobody has met your family. No mother, no father, no people. Doesn't anyone else find that strange?" "They couldn't come tonight," I said. "Convenient," he said. A handful of guests drifted closer, the way a crowd gathers at the edge of something starting to go wrong. He was just warming up. I could feel it coming. And I want you to understand something. I wasn't afraid. I was doing math. I was counting down minutes. I thought the worst he'd do was talk. I was wrong. It was Victoria who turned the cruelty into a crime. She came gliding over in green silk, drawn by the noise, and she did the thing she always did. She priced me with her eyes, slow. Then her hand flew to her chest and she gasped, theatrical, one palm flat against her collarbone. "My ring," she said. "My mother's ring. It's gone." The room turned. It was an emerald, an old one, the kind of green that reads almost black until the light catches it. She'd been wearing it all night. Now her eyes came up off her empty hand and landed on me like a trap snapping shut. She was standing right next to me, by the piano, not 10 minutes ago. Her voice climbed for the crowd. "She took it. She took it." "I never touched you," I said. My calm only made it worse. It always does. Liar. Victoria spun to face the guests, performing now. "I said it the day Ethan first brought her home. You let people like her into your house, and this is what you get." Royce's whole face changed. He'd had a poor girl to mock all night, and now he had something far better. a thief to catch. "Brennan," he said. A broad man stepped out of the shadows near the wall. Dale Brennan ran security for the Ashbury, and he had the flat, careful eyes of a man who follows orders. "Sir," he said, "I'd need her consent before I can." "I don't care what you'd need." Royce didn't even glance at him. "This is my hotel. Search the bag. Now." The room had gone so quiet. You could hear ice settle in a glass. 300 people, and every one of them watching to see whether I would cry. I didn't. I held out my clutch. Brennan took it gently, almost apologetically, and I felt every eye in that lobby crawl across my skin. A grown woman, searched like a suspect at a black tie party. I had been in this exact moment before. Not this room, but this. Strangers reaching for my things, deciding I was guilty before a single question got asked. My father raised me in money, and money never once spared me from being looked at like that. Brennan opened the clutch and tipped it out in front of everyone. A phone, a folded tissue, a house key, lip balm. He shook it twice. A stick of gum dropped out and skittered across the marble. No ring. "Check her coat," Victoria snapped. "Check her." "That's enough." Ethan came through the crowd fast, and a second guard caught him by the shoulder and held him back. "Get your hands off her things. She didn't take anything." "Hold him," Royce said, flat. The guard's grip clamped down. Ethan strained against it and couldn't break loose. I caught his eye and gave the smallest shake of my head. Not yet. He didn't understand it. He would soon enough. I looked at Royce and let my voice carry clean across the room. "The ring is on the lid of the piano," I said. Victoria set it down when she fixed her earring. I watched her do it about 40 minutes ago. I notice where people leave things. It's the job. Every head in the lobby turned toward the piano. There, on the black lacquer lid, catching the light, sat the emerald. A bellman crossed the floor, lifted it, and held it up for the room to see. It scattered little chips of green across the ceiling. Victoria's mouth opened and closed. Near the bar, a woman quietly reached for her coat. I had been accused, searched, and paraded in front of 300 people. And I had been right the entire time. You would think a man might apologize. Royce didn't. I never expected him to. Apologies cost something, and he was already running short on whatever currency they're paid in. He could feel the room turning against him, even if he couldn't have told you why. "That proves nothing," he said, though the steel had gone out of his voice. "She probably meant to come back for it later. Her type always leaves a door open." "Say it plainer, Dad," Ethan said from behind the guard, low and shaking. "Say what you actually mean." "She is beneath us," Royce said. "She always will be. And you have thrown your whole life away for a woman who doesn't own one decent pair of shoes." He leaned in close enough that I could smell the bourbon, and dropped his voice to something almost gentle, which was somehow worse. "I am going to make sure you walk out of here with nothing. You climbed into the wrong family. I'll keep you in courtrooms until you forget you ever met us." I looked up at him. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. And when I answered, I kept it kind. "No, Royce," I said. "You decided who I was the day Ethan brought me home. You never once thought to ask." Something flickered behind his eyes, a draft moving a candle flame. There and gone. Then he laughed it off. "Is that a threat? You don't have the power to threaten a soul in this room." "I don't need power," I said. "I just need to wait about 4 more minutes." Outside, a car door shut. Firm, unhurried. The sound carried through the tall front windows into the silent lobby. Royce didn't hear it. He was still drunk on himself, but Dale Brennan heard his earpiece crackle, and whatever came through, it pushed his eyebrows up toward his hairline. He touched the earpiece. "Say that again," he murmured. He listened. His face changed. "Mr. Hartwell," he said. "Sir, there's a car at the front steps. A man asking for Mrs. Hartwell, for Naomi." "Then throw him out alongside her," Royce said. "Sir," Brennan's voice had gone strange and tight. "I really think you'll want to see this one yourself. If you want to see what happens when those doors open, and trust me, you do, make sure you've hit subscribe. What walks through next is the reason this whole night went around the world by morning." The tall front doors swung open and the cold harbor air rolled in, guttering the nearest candles. The trio stopped playing. 300 people turned toward the entrance as one. A man stepped through. He was in his 60s, calm, in a plain dark coat with no tie and nothing on his hands. Nothing about him announced anything at all. He moved without hurry, in the particular way a man moves when he has never once in his life been told to wait. His eyes traveled the room slowly. The guards, the emptied clutch on the side table, the emerald in the bellman's fingers, his daughter, standing in the dead center of it, and his face, which had been so calm, went very, very cold. Royce looked at him and saw exactly what he expected to see. A nobody. A plain man in a plain coat. Hired help, probably. Come to the wrong door. It was Victoria who made the first mistake. She'd recovered just enough to want her own party back. She saw the plain coat, the missing tie, a man she didn't recognize strolling through her front entrance like he owned the deed, and her brain filled in the rest before her eyes could correct it. "Excuse me." She stepped into his path and lifted her empty champagne flute, holding it out to him the way you hand a glass to a waiter. "The service entrance is around the back, and you can take this while you're at it." She pressed the flute into his hand. He looked down at it. Then he looked up at her, and he smiled. It was not an angry smile. It was worse than that. It was the patient smile of a man who has just been handed the one thing he came here hoping to find. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You've told me everything I needed to know." He set the flute down on the nearest table without drinking from it. That was when Lawrence Tate went white. The Hartwell finance chief had been hovering by the bar with his phone in his hand, half watching the chaos. Now he stared at the man in the plain coat, and the blood went out of his face like somebody had pulled a plug. "Oh God," Tate whispered. "Lawrence." Royce didn't look at him. Not now. But Tate had already taken a step forward. He pulled his glasses off and put them back on, as if he didn't trust what they were showing him. "Mr. Vale," he said, and his voice split clean in half. "Mr. Vale, nobody told us you were coming. If we'd known—" "You weren't meant to know," my father said. "I wanted to watch this family when they thought the only people in the room were ones who couldn't hurt them." Royce's smile flickered for the first time all night. "Vale? Who in God's name is Vale? Lawrence, what are you?" Tate turned to his boss, and he had the look of a man watching a building come down on his own street. "Royce," he said, "that's Julian Vale, Meridian Capital, the recapitalization." He swallowed. "The $900 million that closes Monday. The money keeping the lights on in every building we own." His voice dropped to almost nothing. "He's our lender. He holds the paper on all of it." The words hit the lobby like a dropped tray. My father turned his full attention on Royce, and the room felt suddenly colder, like a window had come open somewhere. "You're right," he said. "I came quietly. I didn't call ahead. I didn't bring anyone with me. I wore the oldest coat I own, and I walked in through your front door like a man you'd never have to notice. I needed to know what kind of family my girl had tied herself to." Then the word landed. "Daughter." You could feel it move through the room and rearrange it. Every head turned to me. I stepped to my father's side, and his hand came to rest on my shoulder, and I let out a breath I'd been holding for 2 hours. "Hi, Dad," I said. It came out steadier than I felt. Royce's mouth opened. Nothing came out of it. "You spent your whole evening telling my daughter she was nothing," my father said. His voice never rose. That was the terrifying part of it. You sat her at a children's table. You mailed her a check made out to a divorce that hadn't happened yet. Tonight you had her searched like a criminal in front of 300 people over a ring your own wife left sitting on a piano. He tilted his head. Did I leave anything out? There has been a terrible misunderstanding, Royce said. There hasn't, my father said. I heard most of it from the front steps. Your doors are very old. They don't shut all the way. The blood was leaving Royce's face now, sinking from his cheeks down to his collar. His hand groped behind him for the back of a chair, found it, and held on, white-knuckled. He understood, at last, what he had done. He had screamed at, searched, and disowned the daughter of the one man on earth holding his whole empire upright. The hotels, the club, the 140-year-old crown he had just reopened on money that wasn't his. You can't pull the financing, Royce said, and his voice came out thin. It would end us. 1,100 jobs. You can't. I can, my father said. And for the last hour, you've been making the case for me. He took his phone out of his coat. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He dialed a number and lifted it to his ear, and somehow that calm was more frightening than any rage could ever have been. Pull the Hartwell recap, he said. Tonight, before the desks open in the morning. A pause. Yes, I'm sure. I'll explain when I land. He hung up. Royce made a sound like the air had been knocked clean out of him. His knees buckled. He caught the chair, lost it, and sat down hard on the cold marble floor he'd spent 2 years restoring. The same floor he'd told me, an hour earlier, I wasn't fit to stand on. He sat there in his beautiful suit, gray and shaking, while 300 guests stared and 100 phones recorded every second of it. Get up, Royce, Victoria hissed, frozen with the empty flute still in her hand. Get up. He couldn't get up. By the time the sun came up, the clips were everywhere. People had been filming since the searching started. By the time the doors closed that night, the footage was already loose, and not a single frame of it made Royce look like the wronged party. Someone stitched it together with captions, and it traveled the way these things travel now. Strangers watched a man scream the word, thief. They watched a grown woman searched over a ring sitting in plain view on a piano. They watched a quiet man in a plain coat say a few words into a phone and bring a dynasty down on its own marble. Strangers online did the rest. Someone dug up an old magazine profile where Royce had called himself a self-made man of character. Someone found Victoria's charity speeches about grace and welcome and set them beside the footage. Side by side, it was brutal. The Hartwell Group didn't survive the week intact. When Meridian pulled the recapitalization, 3 smaller lenders panicked and called in their own notes. By Wednesday, the family trust that technically owned the company called an emergency meeting. At the head of the table sat Adele Crawford, the trust chair, who had warned Royce for years that his temper would cost him more than money. Now it had. They removed him as chief executive that same afternoon. The vote wasn't remotely close. The lawsuits came after. I never raised my voice that night, but what they did to me had legal names anyway. Unlawful detention, a search with no consent, and no cause. Every second of it on film. So I sued. Not for revenge. I wanted one thing. A piece of paper, signed, that admitted out loud what had happened. They settled inside a month. The settlement number stayed private. The apology didn't. Victoria, who had once introduced me as Ethan's little nurse, had to sign her name to a written apology the whole city could read. For people who'd built their entire lives on appearances, a signed confession was about the worst punishment available. Dale Brennan, the security chief, did the math fast when his own charges came up. Under oath, he said he had asked Royce for consent and been told it didn't matter. The recording from the lobby agreed with him. He stayed out of jail by finally saying the thing he should have said while it still counted for something. 6 months on, my life looks almost exactly the way it did before any of this. Same old Honda, same 3 night shifts a week on the pediatric floor, because I like it, because it's mine, and because no child on that ward has ever once cared what my last name is worth. The money was there the whole time. I just never reached for it to feel like a person. Ethan is the one who really changed. There's a steadiness in him now that wasn't there before. Whatever fear his father had drilled into him as a boy finally let go the night he stepped in front of me and didn't lose anything for it. He went to work at Meridian and made my father promise to treat him like any other new hire. He started at the bottom of the analyst pool. Whatever he's earned since, he earned with his own name on it, not mine. As for Royce, he's somewhere quieter now, in a house a fraction the size of the old one, carrying a name that stopped getting him into rooms. Ethan says his father has tried more than once to write me something. He never sends it. I think Royce has finally understood that the only apology that would have meant anything was the free one. The one he could have offered while I stood in his lobby that night, asking nothing of him but a little ordinary decency. Here's what I need to tell you before you go. None of this happened. There's no Naomi, no Royce, no Ashbury, no gala on the Charleston waterfront. I made all of it up. But I didn't make up the feeling. And I think you already knew that. The feeling of being sized up before you've opened your mouth, of watching someone decide you're a thief or a gold digger or hired help based on your shoes and your car and the plainness of your coat. That part is real. It happens in real rooms to real people every single day. And almost none of those people have a father with $900 million idling at the curb. There's no deal to pull and no twist coming. Most of the time, the person standing where Naomi stood just has to take it and then drive home in the dark and say nothing to anyone. Which means the real test in that lobby was never Royce's. Royce is easy. The test belonged to the 300 people standing around him. The ones who studied their drinks. The ones who laughed along. The ones who lifted their phones and never once opened their mouths. That's the part of the story that isn't fiction. That's the part we actually get to choose, in our own rooms, on the nights when nobody important seems to be watching. So let me ask you straight. If you'd been in that lobby before anyone knew my name, would you have said something, or would you have found something interesting to look at on the floor? No wrong answer, but be honest with yourself and tell me in the comments. I do read them. If this one got under your skin, send it to someone who would understand it, and stick around, because the quiet ones on this channel have a habit of turning out to hold every card on the table. Don't measure a person by the price of their coat. The richest soul in any room is hardly ever the one talking loudest. Sometimes it's just the woman in the off-the-rack dress who learned the name of every server before the music started and never asked a single one of them to learn hers.